Hi, everyone, and welcome back to What Kind of Internet Do You Want? I'm Amy James, and I am sitting here with my husband, co-founder,
partner in stuff, hopefully not crime. We'll see what the SEC has to say eventually.
Oh, God, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, hi. I think actually the channel probably knows me. Anyone that has been watching the channel knows that I've made the past couple of videos because you were out on maternity leave.
I was. We have a beautiful baby boy.
He is absolutely amazing.
He is amazing. And, you know, it's funny. I feel like the whole world changed since I went on to maternity leave. I know everybody says that about their baby. You know, they have a baby and it's like, oh my gosh, my whole world is different. Sure, but actually the whole world is different now because AI became a thing while I was on maternity leave.
Yeah, pretty much. It was, I think, Mid-Journey and like the generative AI artwork stuff was really kind of mid last year into the summer. But then, ChatGPT came out, I think, in November. And wow, has it changed everything fast.
It come out in November, and people were kind of messing around with it, but it didn't. I don't know.
This year it's really
like as big of a thing as it did this in 2023. Yeah.
Well, actually, okay. Well, speaking of which, that's actually the subject of our first story. So let's introduce our little. We have a robot AI co-host that's going to give us our headlines.
Hello, everyone. I'm an AI co-host, and I'm excited to be doing this show.
Oh, he's
with
excited.
Amy Devon. Let's jump right into the headlines. First up, AI, unsurprisingly, leads the news this week, with startup Kaido getting an $87.5 million valuation in new funding to build an AI search engine for crypto, and Polygon introducing an AI interface powered by ChatGPT to aid app developers. Looks like I'll have more AI friends soon.
Indeed you will.
I think you will have some new AI friends soon. So just in my read of these articles, it looked like the Kaido project was trying to build, let's call it like a chatbot. You know, I mean, it's supposed to be like probably more advanced than a chatbot, but because it's supposed to be like a search engine of some kind. But
I don't know that there's a distinction at this point. Like, think about the fact that Google has forever been trying to just put the right answer at the top of the window. And
right.
I feel like that's kind of what search engines, the way people used search engines, they asked their question and they wanted an answer. They didn't want to do a bunch of research sometimes. And it feels like a chatbot is kind of the exact way to do a search engine.
Right. So that's what Kaido is working on. They are combining large language models with real-time access to data from the web, including Twitter, Discord, Telegram, governance forums, Medium, Mirror, industry research, news, and Kaido's proprietary Twitter space and podcast transcripts, along with blockchain, on-chain data. And so it's just like this service that, you know, regular people can ask questions. I mean, regular people, developers, I don't know what kind of level, you know, it's going to be responding, if there will be multiple kind of levels in terms of how it responds to you.
Yeah.
CoinDesk, who published this article, got access to it and asked a question. They asked how the launch of an ETF by BlackRock would affect the Bitcoin price. And it's like such a crypto answer. You know, it's just like what you would expect pretty much any talking head on the web about crypto to say, which is like, yeah, probably it's going to make the number go up. But, you know, overall, the market is still uncertain and it will depend on a variety of factors.
And the Bitcoin having maybe overblown, like he said, literally every single cycle. That's hilarious. Yeah, no, I totally dig it. I think I'm especially kind of interested in the Polygon one because it's trying to train it on one particular thing, and I've been trying to do that a little bit lately. And like there's an extra challenge to these kind of things because, okay, for example, our little robot, he was procedurally generated, like the image itself, and then the summaries that he's coming up with is AI. And what was actually funny about that one is the first time I did it, or one of the versions I did it, it actually said that it got an $875 million valuation. So it's like and it was very confident about its answer. It was certain that was correct.
Gosh,
and it's like
really funny.
So even if you give it, and I fit it this article, and it was literally just because you can see, or you can't see in the URL on screen, but the URL is startup-Kaido-gets-875M. So it read the URL and thought, oh, $875 million valuation. So it's like the way we talk to each other and the way we talk to robots is going to be slightly different. And robots, they'll sometimes just make something up and make it sound totally, they're very confident about it, even though it completely made it up.
What I think is so funny is that you would think that robots would be better at math. Right? Because it seems like math is more straightforward.
It is. Actually, I love, okay, so there's a podcast that I like that they said recently on it, language is compression, and it's lossy compression, because we have these ideas in our head and we try to convey them to someone else, and the best we can do is with language, and there's multiple words that might mean something, there's multiple ways to interpret something, so it's lossy, right? Math is supposed to be lossless. It's close to lossless, if you use that same kind of analogy. But I think the problem right now is just people are just misusing it. We have a friend in the Web3 industry he was really excited about this stuff, and he was chatting with it, and he was working on a halving schedule, and he had it figure one out, and it very confidently gave him one back, and it did all the math, and it looked about right. And I remember actually adding it all up and doing the math, and it came out just slightly wrong, and it didn't hedge at all. It didn't say this might not be correct. And I think really it's that we're using chatbots that are good at language to do more things than that. I think there's what is
but
it?
I think that's what's so interesting to me is that it can be specialized in that way. I guess I just feel like it's a computer, therefore math, right? Because of the whole binary and code. I don't know. It's just very weird to me.
But these are specifically trained to understand language, and really they don't actually understand language. They just understand the patterns within language. So what's the most likely next thing to come after this?
Right. That's so weird too.
Well, yeah. Well, when it comes to language, it actually makes sense. When it comes to math, it can be right, but only when it gets kind of lucky. But ChatGPT specifically, just recently they added plugins, and one of those plugins is a Wolfram Alpha one. I haven't played with it yet, but Wolfram basically has their own kind of notation and language for math. So I get the sense that if you were to use that plugin, you could ask, a math problem, a word math problem kind of thing, and it would be able to properly interpret it because it understands English and understands language. And it would also be able to then properly do the math, because a language model isn't trained on all of the rules of math. The only way that it learned them is because there's a lot of math within our language.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay,
It's never been specifically trained on it.
Wolfram
has.
So that means that it could end up with a sixth finger. AI is really bad at hands. It'll be the same kind of thing for a while.
Actually, I heard that they just finally solved the hands issue. I wonder if that's actually true or not. We'll see.
That'll be fun to explore. Okay, so
but one extra thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say one extra thing that's interesting about this is that a lot of people are kind of accusing Web3 of oh, this didn't happen, so we're going to pivot into AI. I've definitely seen that a whole bunch lately. And there's kind of reason for it, because a whole lot of, Web3 interested, startups or protocols or anything else are also showing a great deal of interest in AI. Obviously, these two articles prove that. But I wouldn't say that that's inauthentic. I think it's really because they go well together, really well. You like to say they go together like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? And I'd say there's a lot of reason for that. For one, because in order to really do AI well and do it safely, for example, there's obviously the Terminator danger, and that's a whole other kind of ball of wax. But what most people are kind of thinking right now when it comes to safety is stuff like deepfakes, and that the Pentagon explosion that caused $500 billion of market loss recently. And it's funny, I was a compositor in the past, and so I was trained specifically on how to make images like that. And to someone who's trained on that, or a Photoshop artist or anything like that, they look at it and they're like, this is so obviously fake. Or it even had a lot of the things that you're talking about the 6 fingers and the bad hands. AI art generation often has these weird little aberrations that just
what
look
do you call
AI.
it? Artifacting, I think is what you call it, right?
Yeah, often, yeah.
Yeah, and so so we didn't really break down the difference between these two announcemements, right? So Cato is doing the
they're doing a search engine for all of crypto, right?
But Polygon is doing AI assisted code writing, which is really different. And so I just think, obviously both are exciting.
Yeah.
But they're definitely different in terms of what they're going to be providing.
This is also that's a pretty emergent phenomenon too. I was just playing with one called is it Engineer GPT or GPT Engineer? And there was another one a little bit ago, Auto GPT. It's a very emergent. Okay, so similar to how math is a lossless compression, code is very similar to that in the sense that there's generally only one way to interpret certain things and only one particular solution to a particular type of function that you want to do. There's some overlap and stuff like that, but it means if it understands the language and then you give it the developer docs, it's reasonably likely that it can actually write an application well. Like I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and I think Engineer GPT, it's very good at you give it a single prompt and it can create an entire application. He was all excited about that. He tried to do exactly that, and it generated a really, really complex looking application. He's like, oh my God, if this code works, it's going to be so amazing. And it didn't. It was missing some libraries, stuff like that.
Bummer.
So it's not quite there yet. But
Right,
this is important.
What's so exciting about AI, right? Is like the way that Web3 and AI can sort of reinforce each other to speed
in
things
both
up,
ways,
right?
in both
because
ways.
There have been some of us that are like, okay, why are things going so slow, right? With Web3 adoption. The web was adopted faster than Web3, but the web had to start at zero. There was no web before the web.
So what's Web3's excuse?
What is the freaking problem here?
Right. Well, to be honest, some people would say the complexity and the fact that the interfaces are really complex. Like we're kind of still at the IP address phase of the web where we hadn't yet adopted domain names to make things easy. And we're still, there's name services, but there's a whole bunch of them that are kind of redundant with each other and don't, work with each other and stuff like that. And, Polygon specifically, I remember I was just running into a UX issue with Polygon because Polygon is a Ethereum scaling thing that has its own wrapped versions of Ether and other things inside of it. And so that can be incredibly confusing for anyone who's not already in the industry to be able to actually understand what's going on here. So chatbots that can help answer your questions, or things that can kind of simplify the engineering difficulty of building this for like Web 2 devs, is hugely, hugely important. But I'd say they also work well together on the flip side to that, where Web3 helps solve some of the AI problems.
Absolutely. This is what you were getting to with the doomers, right? It's like people that are afraid of AI are afraid of how kind of
it can fake images, it can fake voices, it can do deep fake video.
And so the kind of scams that can come out of that are super obvious. The thing that's interesting to me is that the solution to this is really obvious to people that are inside crypto, and it's like people that are outside crypto are like not even aware that it exists.
Agreed.
Yeah. And that's so weird.
Yeah.
Because it's like the simplest answer, and it's been something that's been around for a long time. And obviously I'm talking about public key cryptography, right?
Sign everything. Exactly.
Sign everything.
Provenance lets you have actual provenance to something that the web historically hasn't had the ability to do that. Like, the email has had you could do cryptographic signatures on emails, but that didn't really ever take off. Exactly.
Too much of a pain.
Exactly.
And then Proton Mail came along and obscured that, and a lot of us started using Proton Mail, right?
True. So exactly, that just kind of goes to show if you solve the UX issues, you can integrate some of that higher level of technology that makes it complex, but also solves the deeper problems. Like,
it's kind of what you were just talking about, the problem that you had faced with all of these different wrapped tokens that you needed to do something.
Right.
It's like before Proton Mail encrypted things, it's like, sometimes we would send encrypted emails, but more of the time we wouldn't.
It was really hard. Exactly.
It was annoying.
Exactly.
And now,
this
all
introduces,
of our emails are encrypted because we're just using that as a service. And I feel like that's what Web3 sort of offers is like these, it simplifies things as a service.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it makes it,
Yes. So provenance obviously is solved by sign everything, and that's fantastic. You have your own private key that no one else has access to, and now you can put attestations on things and say, this is mine, this is an authentic video of me, this is authentic writing of me, etc. It doesn't do the reverse. You can't prove that something isn't true, but especially as the market and business world and government start to get kind of scared of all these kind of deep fakes and, fake video, fake images, etc. It seems like it would be quite easy for them to adopt the philosophy of, okay, sign everything. Everything that comes from an official source or from a real person gets signed. And then it becomes relatively easy to differentiate all the things that aren't signed or are signed by entities that are associated with past deep fakes, or it's the first time it's ever being used.
That's an important thing to note, right? Is that just because there is provenance, just because there is a signature, doesn't mean that it's true. I think people kind of conflate that a lot.
But it gives you information that you didn't have otherwise. If you put it into a blockchain, it gives you a timestamp that is immutable and can't be changed. You know who it came from. Maybe not the identity of the person, but you know what public key and who that may have been associated with based on past things that public key was used to sign.
Yeah.
Right.
And so from there, you can sort of like extrapolate truth. You have like more tools to evaluate whether or not, let's say, an image that is of not even the Pentagon style building.
Right. Yeah, that was the worst part about it. It didn't even look anything like the Pentagon.
Right.
And serious people are treating it like it was a real thing. Yeah, it's okay.
I know. Weird stuff happens in the news business. But yeah, okay. So
well, hold on. Let me just say one more. That in addition to the kind of provenance that you get from it, there's other aspects of Web3, and kind of specifically in the DPIN sector. And we haven't really explained what that means. It's decentralized physical infrastructure networks. It's the sector that we're most excited about. Years ago, people actually called them utility, and then that term got kind of abused. But it's this stuff that does a real service that isn't a financial service. So a whole lot of what people get excited about is financial services and stuff like that. This is stuff like storage, processing, whether it's CPU or GPU processing. So what I mean by that is, one, if you wanted to have a large language model that is an open source large language model that anyone can have access to, you'd want it to be trained on publicly available training data.
Absolutely.
And so putting that into a permanent place where it can't be forgotten about or erased, or someone turned off their server so it got lost, or was completely proprietary like most of them are right now, means something like Arweave, or what is the service on top of Filecoin?
It's like Lighthouse?
Lighthouse, yeah. Some sort of a Web3 type decentralized permanent file storage, especially the kind, what I especially like about Arweave is every single transaction, so thus every single piece of data that you put has a space for tags. So you can actually associate the tag that describes what the thing is that you uploaded in the data itself, and now you've got a public set of training data. That's huge. The other one is, whenever you're training a large language model, you need access to massive amounts of GPU compute, and there's very specialized hardware for this. The A100s and the H100s are some of the examples of this, where they're like $20,000 GPUs. They're incredibly constrained. They're very, very difficult to get, and they're so expensive, but you only need it for a short time while you're doing your training, and then you can do inference on kind of normal hardware and stuff like that. So a decentralized rental market, like an AWS but decentralized for GPUs, which is what another protocol that we're familiar with called a cache does, is a perfect solution for this. So it's kind of like this is like I said, the peanut butter and jelly. They go along perfectly together, which is really exciting, because I think what it ultimately means is that AI is exciting enough. I think it's the fastest growth of any app ever when ChatGPT came out, kind of thing. If it certainly has to be, like 100 million users within a month, maybe. So that's got the excitement that's causing people to get into it. And then the Mid-Journey and generative images, incredibly exciting as well. I really love that stuff. That will get adopted fast. It is getting adopted fast. If parts of it are built on Web3 rails, it means Web3 is also going to get adopted without people even knowing it. And it's going to solve for the danger issues. It's going to solve for the constraint supply issues. It's going to solve for the proprietary nature of it. And I think even if we do go into like the really doomy, like, Terminator kind of version of it, one of the ways that you can prevent that is by enabling everyone to have access to it. And one of the ways to do that is making it open, publicly available with public training data, et cetera. So I think they're perfectly paired together, and I'm super excited that we're at this era now.
Likewise, absolutely. I think of it like as this virtuous spiral, that AI needs Web3 infrastructure, that Web3 infrastructure is going to benefit from the accelerant of AI, that it's just like really, there are more good people than there are bad people.
Yeah.
And by having this technology, like by those people applying this technology in really beautiful and amazing ways, the internet could just like flourish in a way that we haven't gotten to see so far.
Well, as long as crypto is legal here in the U.S., so that actually is a nice little segue to our next story. What do you got? What do you got for us, Robot?
Crypto regulation may finally be moving forward. House Financial Services Chair Patrick McHenry and Agriculture Committee Chair Glenn Thompson have proposed a draft bill to regulate crypto assets, creating a new digital assets class. The bill is scheduled to go into markup this week and go to a vote in July.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I remember even CZ tweeted an article about it with a clapping emoji. So the industry is excited about this. We've looked at it a little bit ourselves. It doesn't necessarily solve the problems, but I think it's the first step in doing so. It offers a whole lot of definitions that didn't exist previously, and then it tasks the CFTC and the SEC to basically go do some studies and come back, and between those newly adopted definitions, which are very specific and like they define what a decentralized network is and what a DAO is and stuff like that. So if we have, legal definitions of these things,
right,
and then we send the SEC and the CFTC off to kind of figure out how they would handle these particular things, and then we come back together, it's possible we could actually figure this stuff out pretty soon and actually have a legal environment for building these things, fundraising for these things, scaling these things, et cetera, in the US, which would be wonderful because I happen to like the US.
Right, exactly. I mean, there were a couple of things that stood out to me about this. So in this article that we're citing, it's Leo Schwartz of Fortune Crypto. He noted at the beginning that the U.S. is lagging behind all of these different places. The European Union has formally signed its markets in crypto assets regulation into law. Hong Kong is pressuring banks to accept crypto as exchange clients. Brazil recently advanced a governmental decree to establish its central bank as a primary regulator. The U.S. has just been dragging its feet in terms of regulation, and that has really harmed the progress. So when I said earlier, why is it taking so long? The lack of...
This is a big part of why.
Right? It is. It's definitely one of the things that's holding back the market, because there's just a tremendous amount of pressure from entrepreneurs who want to take advantage of these new tools and build cool new things, but they're scared about what could happen to them because of this sort of regulation through enforcement approach. And there's a huge time delay in that regulation too. And so it's you could be kind of successfully building a product the way that LBRY was and have this huge user base, and then essentially just have your knees taken out from under you with an enforcement action.
I mean, they're entirely leading with enforcement. It's kind of absurd.
So this kind of legislation is so necessary and so exciting. The thing that stood out to me about the legislation was that it had a similar it defines a similar sort of asset class to the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. And in the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, they called it an ancillary asset. And in this one, it calls it a restricted digital asset.
Restricted digital asset, yeah. You're right.
And that both bills offered a way to essentially be regulated under the SEC to begin with, and have that sort of restricted digital asset, ancillary asset, have to comply with a portion of the same kind of reporting that they would have to do if they were securities, but it wouldn't be as extensive. And then as the network grows, if it is successful, have a path toward becoming a commodity over time once it reaches, and this is the part that I have issue with, sufficient decentralization, because the bill doesn't define what sufficient decentralization is, which is an understandable kind of dodge, I get why it's a hard thing to define for sure.
Well, I think it's a hard thing to define because there isn't just one way to define it. There's a bunch of different aspects to it.
100%. And it's also even hard to quantify. In the earliest days of the web was so decentralized. It was well, how many web pages were there? How could you really even know that for sure, right? And it's the same kind of thing when it comes to trying to quantify this. How would they be able to quantify it? However, by not defining sufficient decentralization, but by saying it is the path to become a commodity, that ultimately means it's going to have to be decided in the court system.
Yes and no. I mean, because what they did do is, like I was saying, they defined things like digital asset, blockchain. They defined decentralized network, and that includes, so here's some of the key details of that. No individual holds unilateral authority over it. No entity other than a DAO holds more than 20% of its voting power. For at least the past 12 months, all issuances of tokens are coming from functions of the network. No individual owns more than 10%. It also then defines what a DAO is, any org of people using digital assets to form consensus about development, publication, management, or administration of such a blockchain network. So I think what it does is it's easier to define all these elements, and then once you've defined all those elements and you get those two studies, then you can go back and say, okay, so it's this threshold for, how many parties are in the DAO, and this threshold for this, and as long as it's considered a decentralized net, or there's literally operating network or something like that is another term, functional network. So because they define all those subterms, I think what they're doing is they're kind of like, if we can all agree on what all these things are, then it'll be a lot easier to define what this thing is. Sufficient
So you're saying it's like
decentralization.
just like the first step along the way, and you think there would be like maybe a second piece of legislation?
I think so.
We wouldn't have to wait necessarily for
I hope not. I mean, I don't know, because anyone that knows the history of like Section 230 and how we got here, that really was like, we got really, it was to some degree, it was just that we got lucky that a couple of congressmen decided to they wanted to include that, even though they didn't really know what the web was going to be yet. But it was mostly decided by judges.
That's
and
true. It
judges
was.
that were making some assumptions that were true at the time. Like I remember one of them that I remember reading about was that they kind of didn't believe it would be possible for any platform to live monitor everything that's being said by all of its users in order to filter it. And because they didn't think it was possible, they thought no one will ever be able to do that. Well, at this stage they can,
Absolutely,
and they obviously
right,
do. So to some degree, letting judges decide those things can be really beneficial. It's the reason that all the web businesses grew up in the United States. We're the only country in the world that offered them enough protections to be able, from
No,
liability.
that's right. I mean, from a
for the web to
regulatory
exist here.
perspective, the legal cases that happened in other countries, and particularly in the EU, they basically made the opposite kind of ruling. They made the companies liable.
Exactly.
And
so if you're liable for everything that your users do, like the number, there's this great book. Is it the 12 words or the 24 words? That I don't remember how many words there are. 26 words that made the internet.
And it's
a fantastic book.
Section 230 is 26 words, I think is what it's saying.
Right. Yeah, that is. And it has all these great examples of cases that went before the court in the U.S. and then also cases that around the rest of the world, especially the EU, where it's just like the most absurd, silly behavior by a user completely destroys a company, across the EU. So that's why the Twitter and Facebook and every other, major web company exists in the U.S. And so I think it's odd though, because that was kind of lucky happenstance, and it feels like we're going in the opposite direction of like, we're kind of sitting on our laurels. We own the entire tech industry. There's no way it's going to go anywhere else. And that's not true.
Oh my God,
like the Web3 industry is leaving.
Sure.
It's, there's a lot more development in the rest of the world than there is in the US. And that's kind of scary because
it's super scary. We like it here.
Yeah.
Our family's here. We'd like to stay. Yeah.
No kidding. No kidding.
Absolutely. But you have to be where it's like legal to be building Web3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's a second article that we've got that kind of ties into it a little bit.
So this is an op-ed in CoinDesk, and it's kind of just like criticizing the McHenry's market structure bill. And its main criticism is that it's too hard to separate DeFi and centralized finance. Trad, I think it calls it TradFi in this article.
Yeah.
And but this is the part that I think is funny. So basically it's saying, okay, if you make this carve out for DeFi or for crypto, the carve out's going to be so appealing that traditional finance is just going to stop being on the normal stock market and switch to blockchain based, token based ownership.
Oh my God, how horrible would that be? Oh my God. Oh man.
So
I remember
scary. More transparency.
Who remembers T0? There was a conference, I don't know, like 8 years ago or so that Patrick Byrne gave a keynote at, where he basically just laid down like, this is why the
Patrick
stock
totally
market
blew the
is
whistle
such
on
a
this.
mess. Like it takes 2 days to settle or 3 days to settle maybe. And that's because it's going through like 7 different hands. And because it's going through so many different hands, it's entirely possible for there to be a lot more outstanding or traded shares of a stock than actually exist. And like, blockchain solves all those things. You've got instant settlement. That's why they called their startup to solve this problem T0. You've got instant settlement. You've got you can't have fraud. You can't have fake copies of these stocks. Like what? I mean, honestly, a lot of people when we first saw blockchain technology were like, "Oh, this is where the stock market is going to go." Remember, BitShares? Like that's exactly the concept. Because and for that reason, you can kind of understand why some people say, obviously, these things are all securities because they are similar to securities, except for the fact that all the securities laws and all of this regulation built around it is here to protect. What is it? You don't just do regulations just to do regulations. There's a reason for them. They protect users.
they call it asynchronous information or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
Asymmetrical. Yeah,
Asymmetrical
exactly.
information.
The whole premise is you don't want to have the founders have a different set of information, or the insiders have a different set of information than the public if this is a publicly traded thing.
Right.
Because it's not just a limited set of investors. Well, crypto is the same way. Everyone can have access to it, but it doesn't have an information asymmetry problem. Like, development is almost always done in public.
open.
Like, if not like in public chat rooms, they're tweeting absolutely everything.
And then all of the on-chain data is completely auditable. You can even, use AI to make tools to be able to query that data.
And you can't make changes without everyone getting on board to such a high degree that you actually can call it consensus. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a very different beast, and it definitely feels like there's generally just an assumption at the SEC and a lot of regulators and even lawmakers' minds that, like, well, that's the rule. Like, respect the rule as it is. But sometimes it's important to recognize that old rules don't make sense, and you need to modify them. Not
100%.
just to be, chaotic and crazy and Wild West, but because they're harming growth. They're harming the ability to do things faster, more efficiently, and also still safely.
Right. So one of our favorite examples for this is that when the web was beginning, there was this period of time that they considered applying ham radio.
Oh, they just assumed that they should. Yeah.
They considered applying ham radio registration laws to the web. So if you wanted to start a website, you would have to go through...
Register with the FTC? Was it?
FCC.
No, FCC. Yeah.
And
hilarious.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
And the web never would have grown to, the size that it is today and to be this decentralized free marketplace, or that it was decentralized in the early days. I hate to say that it's not now.
But you can also this also brings up, there's another example that we use of you can create new regulations that are wrong, that are just bad and completely destroy you because you're trying to be overprotective and you're not recognizing like, this is a new technology, so it's scary. And the example that I really love to give is in the mid-1800s, England was leading the way on turning the locomotive into cars, right, where you don't need tracks, and everyone can drive around them. And they were decades ahead of everyone else. They're doing really well. And their lawmakers decided, well, this is really scary. Probably there was an accident or someone got hurt or something. So this is really scary, so we really need to protect people. So they came out with these things called red flag laws, where if you're entering a city, you have to slow down to, I don't remember if it was 4 miles an hour, maybe
like
2 miles an hour. It was absolutely insane. I mean, I think they were only driving like 15 at the time, but still, that's a pretty dramatic reduction. And then you had to have someone like 60 yards ahead waving a red flag. And then even in the US, they were considering some variations of that, where it was like, if you're going to pass a horse and carriage, you have to park your car behind the bushes and disassemble the car so that you don't scare the horse. Oh my God. So what happened by that, the US didn't adopt those things. The rest of the world, no one else in the world adopted those things. England did. And they existed for 30 years. Meanwhile, and the whole industry, whatever nascent industry was starting to grow, was completely decimated. And Germany comes along, and Germany invents the car before England, and they get the historical, footnote for it. And then I think a few years after Mercedes-Benz came out and it started getting popular, England's like, oh my God, these were a really bad idea, and they removed the laws. So, like, we don't want to leave old assumptions in place that just don't fit the new technology, and we don't want to overreact to the scariness of new technology and destroy our ability to be competitive in the world. Exactly, we have to get it just right. And we've met with McHenry's office, and there's a handful of people, McHenry amongst them, that are just, they really get it. And if anyone can get this right, I feel like someone that really understands it. I think this is the guy.
For sure.
This is the guy that said Bitcoin is
an unstoppable force.
Right. Yes, exactly. So
very quotable.
Good for him for knowing that and for kind of understanding the nature of this technology. And I really hope to goodness that he's successful.
Yeah, we're excited to see what's going to happen. The bill is going into markup, will be voted on in the beginning of July. And it's just super exciting time for crypto regulation. Our last story, or our second to last story, is we'll throw it to the robot here.
In entertainment news, the first animated film funded by a DAO will bring the Nouns NFT collection to life.
So you just love to see it, that this kind of technology is being used to fund creative work, rather. Like, I am not somebody who is really naturally drawn to technology. That might be a little bit of an understatement. But I'm here in this industry because of how profound this technology is when it comes to creators sharing their work, monetizing their work, really being able to do new things. What we need are new forms, and certainly DAO-funded animation is one of those new forms. What it doesn't say in the article that I'm curious about is whether or not the DAO will participate, if there are any profits from the movie, whether or not the DAO, the funders will participate in those profits or not. I think that's just an interesting question. It's obviously one of the things that is what we would like to see, in terms of it being legal, again, to do that kind of a thing.
I think we especially would like to see that, because this is something we actually wrote for the Nascent Ethereum forums way back in the day when they existed. This has been archived now. We had to find it. MovieCoin, worldwide secure distribution of movies and payment system to connect content creators and audiences. We wrote this almost 10 years ago at this point.
Oh, wow.
And I was just looking through it as we were getting ready for this. And there's a handful of details that we were kind of outlining, like, it should kind of be built on Arweave or IPFS kind of thing. And I would imagine they'll likely do that. It doesn't say so in the article. And that there should be a specific set of miners that are securing the data. So obviously, depending on what distribution network you put it on, you still get that. But we've got crowdfunding right in. And so it seems like we've definitely got that. And, oh, wow, look at that. An Ethereum DAO. Very specifically. So yeah, we are soothsayers. We saw it coming.
Well, I mean, that's just you. You see everything coming early. But I will say, that is why, that's why we're so excited, or at least I'm so excited about this technology, is that we have a background as working in the entertainment industry, and the potential for this technology to... What's been really sad about how technology has been used so far is that it's kind of hurt artists, in this weird way. Like, it's given them more exposure than ever before, but you can't pay your bills on exposure.
Yeah.
And the lack of control, the lack of direct relationship with their audience, it sort of forced them into, the only way to make money is to tour. And hey, touring's fun for sure, right? But you should be able to make money from selling your album, your movie, whatever it might be, directly as well.
Well, that's another thing that cryptocurrency and micropayments can help solve. Like, I think specifically, you're talking about music, and the challenge is people don't want to buy a $10 album anymore. I don't think people would have a problem with paying 1 cent to listen to something, because
especially
if you actually average that out
again, right?
Exactly.
That's the problem, is that we're still at the point where maybe you could do that, but you're going to have to install a browser extension. It's going to be this really clunky process, and things aren't going to all just directly work with each other really smoothly. And that's
a service unifies it. It says, I'll charge you a subscription, of $5 or $10 a month, kind of like your Spotify. And we've done the research on this. People people that actively listen to music listen to about 500 unique songs in a month. So 1 cent per play or 2 cents per play, and that works out to $5 to $10 a month. And so now you're both paying for your content. It's not, out of hand. It's not crazy costs. And the artists are actually receiving a direct bit, because at 1 or 2 cents per play of a song, it was years ago that we did this, but I think it was 20 times the revenue that they're getting right now.
It was 7 to 8 times for the artist. Of what they would make right now on something like Spotify.
So,
there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Again,
number,
another way that Web3 technology can kind of help solve these issues. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
But as you were saying, artists are kind of getting pushed aside for this. I obviously saw that happening. I was in visual effects, a compositor 15 years ago or 20, I don't know how many years ago, but I got out honestly right at the right time, because I think it was because what was happening is it's becoming a global industry, and so studios would recognize that there was a place that they could hire in another country to do things like rotoscoping or something like that. That'd be a lot less expensive, and so they don't need to use the US-based artists for it. But as a result of that kind of it's not like the fun kind of work that an artist wants to do, but it might be a significant portion of the revenue that a post house was getting. And now if that revenue just goes completely to a different firm outside the country, the post houses start collapsing. I remember it was about the same time that Life of Pi won the Academy Award for, I think it won visual effects, but also Best Picture, but I think it also won Best Visual Effects. And outside the awards ceremony were artists from Rhythm and Hues who'd been laid off and didn't receive like 2 or 3 months of pay. Exactly. And they're picketing and saying like, this is obviously very unfair. This movie wouldn't have been the same without us. And we're getting, kind of mistreated here. And it's interesting how this is, yes, this is an example of how by using modern technology and DAOs and stuff like that, you can kind of, obviously do the crowdfunding, and you can kind of, spread around the organization and how decision making is happening. But there's emergent forms of art also, and I'm sure that AI generated art is going to play into this. I remember I was just watching Marvel, owned by probably the largest studio in the world, Disney, just released a new show, Secret Invasion, this week, and I was stunned. The opening titles are definitely AI generated. Certainly not completely, like there was an artist's hand involved, but it was. You look at the faces and you can see that weird texturing happening or whatever. I don't know how you describe that. Eventually we're going to have terms for it when AI can do stuff that looks exactly the same way as normal produced visual effects. We're going to look back at this era as like that was the immature version of it. But Coke did a commercial, or I think it was Coke or Pepsi did a commercial a few months ago where it's really, it's kind of a style. And so obviously, wide, mainstream audiences that don't know this stuff, they'll just look at it and say, well, that's a style and it's an interesting animation style. But to anyone who's worked with AI animation, it's obviously AI animation. And so I look at it and I'm like, well, that was very, very cool. But at the same time, I recognize like how many thousands of hours of manual work was saved by not doing that. And to an artist that had to do that stuff, you're like, oh, thank God I don't have to do it. But you're also not getting paid to do it. And so the producers are stoked. They saved an enormous amount of money and they produced, a 2-minute long kind of segment for a lot less than they would have. But the question is this going to, I think both, because we have the danger of jobs are going to be lost from this worldwide. Certainly it's going to happen. For sure. But also it means fewer artists can create more. And I think honestly what we're looking at is just kind of a renaissance of content creation. Like it's going to be in the hands of everyone. Everyone can make anything they want, type in a prompt and you get an animation. Like and on top of the fact that all the hardware and the production equipment and stuff is so inexpensive at this point, and you can shoot on 6K.
Right, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we kind of experienced that first like pop from all of the hardware being accessible at a consumer price point, but now we're going to experience kind of the second, and it's just going to be that much more exciting. All right, well then back to our robot here for Bitcoin the last
hits 1 year
story.
High, soars past $31.3 thousand.
Yes.
This is the highest price Bitcoin has seen over the course of the past year.
Hey, thanks for that update, robot. Price action.
Amy is really not a big fan of the stonks. But we're going to talk about it every once in a while a little bit, just because obviously it matters to some degree. And really there's the question, we were talking about this yesterday and she was saying like, what does $5,000 mean? Like that's no big deal whatsoever. And that generally is true. But when it compounds on top of a little bit more before that and a little bit more before that, and in the article itself, it talks about how it just broke above the 200-week moving average. That's significant, because it just means that your general
price, like, oh my gosh, it's up another 1,000. Oh, it's up another. I'm like, am I supposed to be reading something between the lines here? Who cares?
Well, hopefully it means that this is. Because again, right on schedule with the halving coming up in a year. Generally, the trend is about. So we come off the last all-time high and big crash, and then we spend all this time in crypto winter, and it's miserable. And during crypto winter, we'll have a week where $5,000 goes up, and then the next week it comes back down, or maybe a little bit slower, or something like that. But traditionally, and who knows, maybe once a pattern is established, it's easy to break it, unfortunately. But the pattern has been that 1 year from the halving, which is right about where we are right now, I think it's going to be April of next year. The price starts to come back up and crypto winter starts to end. We're actually going to start recovering and we're going to, get back to our previous all-time high and then rush past it into next realm. So whenever we want to kind of check out the markets and stuff like that, we've got this. We're down at the very bottom there. We've got the top 10 cryptos and then the top 10 movers of the day. And then the heat map on top of that's actually the DPIN sector. That's all of the stuff that, so this term actually came from a researcher at Masari named Sami Kassab. He's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely check his work out. It's fantastic. And honestly,
so he's tracking
making a
all
good
of
case
these
for, so one of the things for people that are new that's like part of these cycles of the bull market and the bear market is that during the bear market is when a lot of the building happens that then drives the next bull market.
Exactly.
And sort of secretly, that's why I like the bear markets better, because there's like not nearly as much hype and noise and people who are just like there because of the money. There are just like the people who are in it for whatever their kind of like true, pure, honest reason is for driving them forward and staying in it when times are tough. So for me, that's what it's going to do for creativity, for, those like just sort of like pure coding nerds. It's just that they love these problems, and so those are like the kind of people that you're interacting with and getting to work with during these times.
But because of all the output that they produced and what came from that, we then have the next time, like, it's very much a, the chasing each other kind of thing, because it's driven, I think, largely by the halving, that miners need to make twice as much money for all the work that they're doing by next year. So that just creates this pressure that goes in that direction. Yeah. But then, so now you've got new money flowing into crypto, and it usually starts at Bitcoin, and then it trickles down into altcoin markets. And because it's easier that way because there's more markets to exchange that trade Bitcoin. And then once you've got Bitcoin, it becomes easier to get into altcoins. But also it's a psychological thing. Like it's easiest to understand Bitcoin. It's kind of the most basic. It's just money. Money is probably the most important of them.
Cash for the internet.
And it's hardest to get right. But once you get it right, now you've got your reserve currency within the industry. But once it's there and someone's learned the basics of, okay, this is how a wallet works kind of thing, now they're ready to get into the next layers of it. Exactly. And they're like, oh, what's this do? And what's this do? And what's this do? And we think deep in sector is because it tends to be that each cycle there is something that captures the excitement.
Right. There was like the DeFi summer.
Yep.
There was the whole NFT kind of thing that happened.
I think our very first cycle was the altcoin explosion. It was when there was a few altcoins and then suddenly turned into like 1,000.
Like the second one? Would you call it
I think ICO was part of that. Exactly.
Yeah, I would too. So it was like ICOs, and then it was DeFi summer, and then it was NFTs, and now we're kind of in our next lull. And I think that there's a really solid case that it's going to be the D-pin run for this time, because of that sort of interconnected need between Web3 infrastructure and AI, and that AI is having this really big moment right now, and that AI naturally that Web3 infrastructure sort of naturally solves a lot of those problems with AI. I think that there's just like a really strong case that infrastructure is about to have its moment too. Which
is probably why Render is up. I mean, I don't know. A lot of these, they might just be because Bitcoin just surged, and so now some of that money is flowing into all these alts, because none of them are enormous amounts. 5%, 2%, 3%, 5, 6.
Whatever.
We'll
keep an eye on it for sure and let you know. But that was it for today.
Yes. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And we don't know exactly what the cadence of these will be. It might be a weekly Web3 wrap-up, or we might do them a little bit more often as there's breaking things, but we'll see. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.